live and in person. So here we are. Well, welcome everybody to the Taste of the Spring Allocation. I'll just wait a couple minutes to let everybody log in, and then John and I'll join in here. We've got John Terlato this evening, special guest, proprietor of Vintner, Sanford Winery, and a good friend.
Hey Trey, how you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Ready
Fabulous.
to have a glass of wine or three.
Indeed, at least three.
Yeah, did you pull yours out of the fridge already?
I did, absolutely. Pulled them out a little while ago. They were they're at cellar temperature right now, so they're perfect. They're good.
Nice.
Good.
Hi Nick, welcome. Yeah, mine are at cellar temp too. Master sommelier once told me, he said, put your reds in 30 minutes before you want to drink them, and pull your whites out 30 minutes before you want to drink them.
Good.
So.
Hey Nick, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey Elizabeth, welcome.
Hey, bunch of fun friends joining us. That's awesome.
Yeah. So this evening, for everyone at home, John Terlato, the proprietor, Sanford Winery, and myself are going to be tasting the 17 Sanford and Benedict Pinot Noir, the 15 Founders Pinot Noir, and the 2017 Vista Rincon Chardonnay from La Rinconada. So really excited to taste these wines with you, and I'm really pleased with how all three of them are showing right now. This is a strong lineup.
They're great. They're showing beautifully right now. Hey, I thought it would be good for us to talk a little bit to our visitors about the impetus or the catalyst you and I doing this series. For all of you out there, you know, Trey and I are dear friends. We get to spend a lot of time together in the vineyard and in the winery. You know, harvest, pick, crush, élevage. We spend a ton of time together, and we really do have a lot of fun together, making decisions, tasting wines. And we thought that it would be fun and interesting to try and bring our wine club members and our Facebook followers kind of closer to Trey and I in terms of the way that we think, the decisions that we're making, the discussions that we're having through farming, pick window, fermentation, élevage, because look at it's one of the most fascinating industries and one of the most fascinating responsibilities on the face of the planet as far as I'm concerned. And Trey and I wanted to share it because it's just fun, right? And Trey's gonna and there's moments where it's not so much fun, but because there's some hard decisions in there, but I leave those to Trey. But we're going to try and bring you right to the crush pad or right to the vineyard. Go ahead, Trey. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, not at all. It's a free form conversation, which I'm completely ready for. So I just thought before we started, just wanted to let everybody know that if you have any questions at all, this is, as John put it, this is a conversation, and it should be fun for all of us. So so let us know what questions you have and what wines you guys are drinking at home. John and I, we like to start off with tasting. We start off with the reds, and then we're going to finish with the whites. So we're starting with the 2017 Sanford and Benedict Pinot Noir together, which is tasting beautifully. But I thought before we fully dove in, John, if you could just highlight and give a quick background for everybody at home, what your family does in the wine industry and the history of your family in the wine industry for everyone at home.
That would be great. I'll try and be brief over, you know, an 80-year history. Look, I'm the luckiest guy on the face of the planet. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, got involved in the business, you know, about 80 years ago. My father, you know, ran the business after him for many years. My brother and I continue forward with those ideas and those values today. And when we're fortunate to have the fourth generation, my brother's children involved in the business, it's 80 years of being in the wine business. And, if you think about, 80 years ago, 70 years ago, 60 years ago, even, in the 50s, when my father was in the business as a retailer, the most expensive bottle of wine that he had in his retail shop was $4.98 a bottle. This is 1955. Crazy, incredible. Right? And that so bottle, it gets better. That bottle for $4.98 was Chateau Petrus, right? So now you have to remember, this is at a time where, a Cadillac was $600. One of the finest American cars at the time was $600. So relatively speaking, not much has changed, except that at the time, the wine business was emergent in the U.S. My dad was very much involved with many of the industry pioneers. And today we're lucky. Our family owns some amazing vineyards in California. We have these extraordinary relationships with people like Trey Fletcher at Sanford and Elizabeth Viana at Chimney Rock and Brian Parker and Marisa Taylor at Rutherford Hill. And we get to make wine, right? We grow grapes and we make wine. And it's just interesting and it's fun and it's provocative. We've been at it for 80 years. We're very lucky. We're very fortunate. And our goal is really, quite simply, to cause people to smile, right? After all the work, the farming, the harvest, the élevage, when you put that wine up to your mouth and you taste it, the first visceral response that we're hoping for is that you smile and you say, this is just incredible. This is delicious, right?
Yeah, so, at the heart of it, we're all pleasers. And, when you have those long days or you're working in a cold cellar or vineyard in the wintertime, it's just kind of like, God, I hope someone really enjoys this. And when you do get that, it's like, oh, I needed to hear that.
Yeah. So you've heard me say it, Trey, right? Delicious doesn't require an explanation. And it's funny, somebody pushed back on me. They said, delicious is not exactly a term of art as it relates to the wine business. And I said, delicious is a visceral word, right?
Yeah.
When you go into a restaurant and you bite into a cheeseburger and you think that it's the most amazing cheeseburger that you've ever eaten, you don't really need a critic to tell you what the score should be. You just know, right?
Right.
And that's not a ding on critics. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is we're trying, Trey and I are trying to demystify wine and make it easy and accessible. And when you put wine in your mouth, it's delicious. You just kind of know it. And then you can go from there. So that's the history of the family. Trey and I are having fun making wines, growing grapes, and bringing them to you. And hopefully the end result is a smile.
Nice. Well, Ken Klein, drinking the 2015 La Rinconada in Santa Barbara. Cheers, Ken, and everyone else that's joined in. If you've just joined in, just don't hesitate to ask John and myself any questions that you want. And we're here to have a great conversation and to share it with you all. Speaking of wine, the 17 Sanford and Benedict, I just put my nose in that glass and it just says S&B to me right away. And when I got here, it was really hard for me to look at that vineyard, the first vineyard planted to Pinot Noir back in '71, and a vineyard that you and your family have invested in heavily to keep healthy, productive, and really showing the uniqueness of the site, like Block 6, Block 5, and the old vines in Block 13 just work so well together to highlight that site. It really brings a warmth and a beauty that I just love.
Trey, I'm going to share with the group some of the discussions that we have around the blocks, right? So the way that we look at the blocks in our vineyard, we have two ranches. We have Rinconada on one side, which was really carved out. It was, as a result of a million years ago of the meandering of the Santa Ynez River.
And we'll put up a map of the two vineyards so we can see sort of them side by side right now.
That would be great. All right, so here's the two ranches. The vineyard blocks that have the R in front of them is La Rinconada. That's one ranch on the left, and then the vineyard blocks with the T in front of them. That's Sanford and Benedict. And you can see that kind of gray area to the left. That was as a result of this oxbow, meandering of the Santa Ynez River that deposited a lot of soil to the site. And then on the right-hand side, Sanford and Benedict, this was, as a result of a landslide about 10,000 years ago of this Monterey shale, which is marine-based soil. But if you look at all these vineyard blocks, when Trey and I are walking through these vineyards, we're actually describing them as people. The best way that I can associate something that's happening in a vineyard block is to try and describe a block as a person. Is this an introvert? Is this an extrovert? Is this masculine or feminine? Is it structural? Is it minerally? And the more descriptors that we can attach to a vineyard block, the clearer the decisions that we make when and really Trey's making these decisions. If you have a block, if we have a block that's a masculine extrovert, we know that it will handle contact well. And if we have and if we have a vineyard block that maybe is a bit of an introvert, we know that it's not going to enjoy too much contact in the fermentation process and then all the way through élevage. So when Trey's talking about a block that reminds him of something, it's because he's walking in the blocks, and we're talking about these blocks as people and trying to really truly understand what's here. This is the essence of wines that are site specific. You've probably heard that a bunch of times. People talk about wines that are site specific. It really is block specific, because we know that R19 is very, very different from T1. And so what Trey's trying to do is express those differences in a very, very granular way without interfering, because our view is that man needs to be involved in winemaking, but not interfere. And Trey
that's the tough part.
Yeah, tell him about that, Trey. It's fascinating when I see you, when we're talking in front of a ferment, and we're talking about what it tastes like, and you're talking about the next activity that you want to involve yourself in. Can you share with the group a little bit about some of the things that you think about when you're interacting with a wine during fermentation?
Yeah, it's my favorite part of growing grapes and making wine. Really, is after we pick the Pinot Noir or the Chardonnay and it's fermenting, and we're tasting it 2-3 times a day, and you do a pump over, you wet the cap, or you punch down, you push the cap in contact with the wine, and you can taste it a few hours later and see what that did to it. And we can really closely, 3 times a day throughout a 21-day fermentation, taste what we're getting out of that wine and what that wine's giving back from us. And so for Sanford and Benedict, for example, like it's primarily 3 blocks that go into it year in and year out. And 2 of them are complete introverts, block 6 and block 5, and one's a real extrovert that likes a lot of contact, T13, the old vines. And so I can see when there is a line, and when I have crossed it by being a little too aggressive. And the hardest part is to really have the power to do nothing sometimes, and to sit back and let the wine make itself, but not let it get out of control like a child or something that doesn't have enough attention, I think. And it's fascinating. It's so fun. It's so fun. And you can see where you've really, missed it a little bit, and you have to really catch up to the wine, and you misinterpreted what it gave you. And it's the greatest part for me. And you and I, we've tasted so many times, staining that beautiful white porcelain sink in the farmhouse dark purple, tasting through 30 fermentations in the morning, and trying to figure out what the next move is for that individual block.
But and in that lies the beauty of what we do, right? And then Trey, probably would be good for you. Some people might think, okay, we make all these decisions, or you make all these decisions during fermentation, and then we're kind of done and we put it in the barrel. But maybe you want to talk to them about thinking about what's happening upstream, right? Because you're making right?
Yeah, so right now the vineyard's going through flowering, and we can see the fruit set. We can see the size of the clusters and everything. And so Eric, Malia, our vineyard manager, and John and myself will go through the vineyard, just countless times throughout the season, and we can tell if a site is looking like it'll be a good candidate for whole cluster, or if a site will need a lot more destemming, or if we think we're going to get a really ripe site that year, and if we need to be a little ahead of it picking. And so it's kind of like those ideas, those understandings, knowing sort of the location and the soil and the personality is how we would act in the fermenter. And then further downstream, what barrels work really well with it. Like we figured out, there's a couple Coopers that just work brilliantly with Sanford and Benedict that don't work well with the Rinconada Pinot Noir. Elizabeth asks, how would you describe the difference between La Rinconada and Sanford and Benedict with jazz styles? And I would say, La Rinconada is very much, it's Coltrane. It's very compressed, fitting a lot of notes in a very compact spot with a lot to say and a really loud voice. Whereas Sanford and Benedict is a little more like Miles Davis, it's, it's a little more modal. There's a lot more space between the notes and a lot more room to expand, I think.
That's awesome. That's a great descriptor. We should probably talk. I know. Look, I know that people like for us to talk about the wines, but I will tell you, if you have the wines in front of you, we really like people to come to their own conclusions around what they taste. Trey can certainly tell you, his views on the wines, but I'd like you to come to your own conclusions a little bit. But maybe we talk a little bit about the site. I think we have some. Do we have some pictures of the vineyard and maybe? Oh, there we go. So
yeah, there's Sanford and Benedict standing in the middle of the vineyard, right, almost at the base of the old Sanford and Benedict winery, the barn. And so
this is, go ahead, Trey. Sorry. Nope.
No. So you can see straight ahead in front of those trees is a newer development, and then just past those trees is where the old vines are, the founders that we're tasting right now, which I think is tasting beautifully. And then the different components for Sanford and Benedict come from the different soil types that are there on that slope.
Yeah. So this is an interesting vineyard, right? This is the first vineyard that was planted to Pinot Noir in 1971 by Michael Benedict and Richard Sanford. And Michael Benedict, with his background as a botanist, really had identified this site as having extraordinary potential. He realized that this site existed as a result of a landslide. It had highly fractured Monterey shale, marine-based soils that had high water holding capacities. They dug to see how far down, and they were unable to reach the bottom hard pan, if you will, with a backhoe. So he recognized that this was highly fractured, deep soil with high water holding capacity that probably would support the growth of grapevines. Everybody told him that he was crazy, that it was too cold here, and that the Pinot Noir would never properly mature. Now, what is it, 50-something years later, I think he probably proved his proposition was correct. This has been, identified as one of the 5 most iconic vineyards in California. And the reason was because he identified it, as potentially a great site. We think about the past. Michael's a dear friend. He engages with Trey and I in incredible conversations. He's an amazing human being he's a veritable cornucopia of knowledge and information and history. And we have these fabulous discussions, and we blind taste together all the time, right? So
yeah, I love blind tasting with you. It's it really puts everything into perspective. If you can be such a harsh critic of yourself. I know I'm really hard on myself. I know you can be too. And it's so nice to blind taste our wines, against a peer group that's not just from Santa Rita Hills, but from the world, and to see how we stand up.
No, that's absolutely true. Look at, blind tasting is something that, my father taught me. My father and my brother and I blind tasted going back as far as I can remember. So I'll start with saying that I know that I was blind tasting when I was 18 years old, legal drinking age. And
it wasn't before then, huh?
No, not that I can recall. So we always tasted blind, no matter what my father brought home or brought to the table. We would sit at the table and we would taste blind, which really causes you to, focus on the wines that are in front of you and not be distracted in any way, shape, or form by a label or a price point or a varietal or a location, a venue. And it really causes you to dial in. So Trey and I, when we're tasting, and Michael Benedict is usually there. My father, whenever he can join us, or my brother, we're tasting together. But the idea is to put these wines onto the table with the great and important wines of the world, taste them blind, and see, where do we stand? And it's not about winemaking necessarily. Trey understands this.
Or ego or competition at all. It's just a better understanding of the site and how everyone else's wines show together. It really helps me see Sanford and Benedict and La Rinconada in a completely different light.
That's absolutely true. And you look at, we taste wines together, and we'll taste and we'll look at each other and go, God, what were they thinking? Or, what it really highlights, right? I mean, it highlights the great sights of the world. When we blind taste a wine that is just an extraordinary sight, we know it right away, right?
Yeah.
And the winemaker had this incredible self-confidence to not interfere with what the site had to offer. And then we look at each other and we go, hey, we've got this amazing site, this amazing parcel, Sanford, Benedict, and Rinconada. How do we make decisions that allow us to show that place, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the fun.
I think the strategy has been just, lots of upstream decisions, using techniques and gentle farming and gentle winemaking in a judicious way. What works for this site and what doesn't, and how do we not overpower and hide the beauty of what we think we can get from this site by farming. I mean,
so I don't know if you're watching the comments, but Nick Kokonis is on, who's a dear friend.
Nick is slaying it.
He owns a restaurant a couple of restaurants that some of you may recognize. Alinea in Chicago and Next, and a host of other restaurants. He says that some may suggest that I'm still tasting blind, which, by the way, okay, Nick, you're probably right. You've tasted with me a bunch of times too. And yes, it is absolutely funny. Blind tastings, I know, right? He probably does. Come on, Nick, you probably do the same thing with the foods and the dishes at the restaurant, right? You taste blind, you put a mask on. Eye mask, of course. So anyway, we have fun blind tasting. Trey, you talked about the S&B, right?
Yes.
You want to talk about the blocks that make up that wine?
Yes. So block 6, as we alluded to earlier, very dark, very brooding block with lots of structure, lots of intensity. It's definitely a block that has a lot to say and doesn't require a lot of contact. And then block 5, which is kind of an enigma. It's a very picturesque block. It's right next door to block 6, but tastes completely different. It's very warm. It's very genteel, and it's really elusive until about halfway through fermentation, and also during the élevage when it's in cellar. It doesn't give you much right away, and then it just builds. It's kind of the kid that didn't do great in high school that really blossoms a little later. And then, of course, T13, the old vines. There's a few barrels of that in Sanford and Benedict as well. And so the old vines planted by Michael Benedict and Richard Sanford in the early 70s from that beautiful selection of Pinot Noir that has probably been in California since the late 1800s. And there's another picture of that block that we can put up of where the founders are from, of the original planting. And that Pinot Noir, it was planted in 71, and you can see it's still very healthy. This is a picture of our crew picking in the early morning hours. We start, as you know, John, we start very early in the morning, sometimes 10:30 at night, and we'll pick all the way through the night with big stadium lights, and get the fruit to the winery when it's nice and cold, and the donuts are nice and warm. So
we'll come to the donuts in a second. We're gonna. This picture reminds me of a bunch of things, and Hillary actually asked a question about, is that because of the soil, the clones, or the clones as well? So Sanford and Benedict especially this particular block that's showing here is unique in a couple of ways, but probably the most important of which is it's planted on its own roots. It's Vitis vinifera on its own roots, planted in 71, meaning there's no rootstock. And it was a clone that Michael Benedict got from a friend of his, and we won't go into the story right now about where that clone came from. But this magical connection from the soil, which is Monterey shale, marine base, as I mentioned before, through the vine root structure, into the vine itself, and then up to the canopy and the grapes. This is a really special site because of the fact that it's Vitis vinifera on its own roots, planted some 50-something years ago. So mature vines with no filter, right? I sometimes think of, and Trey, you can help me with this. I sometimes think of this idea of, a root structure and a graft on top, and where that graft exists could sometimes, some people argue that it acts as some type of a filter in terms of what comes up through the soil. And here with these old vines planted on their own roots, there's virtually no disruption.
And I think it's fascinating because it's very rare. I mean, there's only a handful of vineyards, not just in the U.S., but in the world, whether you're in, France or Italy or Austria or Germany, New Zealand, California, Argentina, that are planted on their own roots. Phylloxera was one of America's gifts to the world. And, luckily, a genius French botanist figured out that if you grafted a French grape like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or an Italian grape on top of an American rootstock so that the roots were American, it could grow with phylloxera, and the top part of that vine would be Pinot Noir. But these, because of the soils and because of the cool climate and the nature of our soils and sort of our isolation in a lot of ways, have allowed those own-rooted vines to grow and flourish for the last 47 years, which, I mean, hardly anybody has. So it's a real treat. And I don't know about you, John, but when I think of wines that I've had that are own-rooted, I think of like the tannin quality and the texture, and it's really ephemeral and it's very suave, and it's generally not like I think of Capellanos, Barolos, or Pinot Noirs from other vineyards around the world that I've had a handful of that have a tannin quality that's very fine, very suave, and very elegant. And the Founders definitely has that year in and year out.
No question. It presents itself uniquely, right? As long as we stay out of the way, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I don't think that getting in the way has ever really worked for me. And when I taste these wines, speaking of blind tasting, I don't think I could say, oh, this wine's definitely own-rooted and this wine's not. But when you compare the two side by side, you can see that differentiation between the Founders vines, for me personally.
It's nuanced. Well, you and I, we barrel taste often enough, right? So we're going through the winery and we're tasting one block that's own-rooted and another block which may not be. And you and I both know that it's nuanced, but it's also present and visible, so to speak, right? And that's why we bottle single block wines like Founders, which is the second wine that we're drinking. It's a pure expression of the place. There's no other blocks. There's no other personalities that are engaged in that putting together of a wine. So it's a pure expression of a place, which we both love, and that's why we enjoy it. Rochelle Fowler asked, could we talk about gravity flow and how that's different? Trey, do you want to talk about the handling of wine and why people talk about gravity and how it might actually make a difference?
Yeah. So just like people argue about their gin martini or martini, shaken, not stirred. I don't want to bruise the gin or whatnot. With Pinot Noir and all wines in general, we're trying so hard that the winemaker's job essentially is to take the fruit very carefully from the vineyard and get it into to the fermentation and then the barrel so it can sleep and express itself as gently as possible. And gravity flow is one of those techniques. So instead of pumping the wine, which can aerate it and can beat it up a little bit if you have a really rough pump, what we do here and how the winery was designed at Sanford is we use gravity. And so how we move the wines is we just basically take it from one tank that's up high into one tank that's down low and just let the wine flow by gravity. So it's much more gentle on the wine, and hopefully it doesn't damage the delicate aromatics and the texture and the flavors of that wine that we know. When we taste it in the barrel, we want you to experience that pure essence of that wine as best as possible in the bottle. And gravity flow is one of those techniques that we use. We have these elevators at the winery that we can actually raise up and hold the wine up so that we can fill barrels down below from those elevators. And my cellar crew, who's just fantastic, and they've all been here for 20 years, and they're just not only conscientious, but just really lovely people to work with, have never worked for another winery. And so when I first started here, they're like, Trey, what kind of elevators did you have at your last winery? And how did you move the wine by gravity? I was like, well, we didn't. I was like, no one has elevators at their winery, and it's very hard for most wineries to move it by gravity. So
Yeah,
that answers it, Michelle.
They're very cool. I mean, look, we have these 4 big tanks right in the center in a big tower, and they're down below the ground when they're fully deployed downwards. And then once we fill them up and we deploy them upwards, we're all of a sudden able to move wine through gravity without having to use pumps, which is very gentle, right? It's
incredibly gentle.
It's incredibly gentle, and especially with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, where those two varietals don't like, they're not bruisers. They don't like to be manhandled, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and it really goes with that principle of every time you touch it in the cellar, you're taking something away. And by moving it with gravity, we're hopefully taking as little away as possible and giving you guys as much as what the vineyard gave us on day one.
Yeah, absolutely. Founders, we talked a little bit about that, or do you want to give a little bit of? I'm just kind of drinking through my wines here, so I'm pretty happy.
Not too fast.
I'd love to know how many people are actually drinking wine while we're doing this tasting. A very specific reason for my question. I've found historically when we have an audience that the more wine you drink, the smarter we sound. So
certainly,
right. So we're always encouraging our guests and our viewers to go ahead and consume so that we could sound that much more intelligent. Founders, you want to talk? Do you want to show? That was a picture of the founders that we had before, right?
Yeah, that was the founders block in the vineyard, and so we have the founders Pinot Noir right now, which is tasting beautifully, very elegant. I think it's our wine that comes the closest to that classic description of the iron fist and the velvet glove, and a lot of that is very good soil, good planning on Michael, Benedict, and Richard Sanford's part, and then great stewardship and reinvestment into the vineyard with the Terlatos and the whole team here at Sanford. We don't take those for granted. I'm starting to move towards the Chardonnay, John.
Let's do it. Hey, do you want to talk a little bit about why we when we're tasting, not necessarily at dinner, but do you want to talk a little bit about why we taste our reds before the whites?
Yeah. So obviously at dinner we would have the whites before reds, but when we're tasting, it kind of throws people for a loop, and I hope it doesn't throw any of you at home for a loop. That I just poured myself the Vista Rincon 2017 Chardonnay last, and the simple reason is when you're tasting reds first and then finishing with the whites, it freshens up your palate. It's much easier, I think, to taste Chardonnay second. Chardonnay can be very hard to warm up on because there's so much going on with the acidity and the minerality and the salinity that can frankly throw me off.
Yeah, right. So it's about the acidic structure and the salinity, and just in terms of the way that we perceive wines. Or we taste wines. In Burgundy, we always like to. I have always tasted reds before whites in the cellar. and even at the tasting table. And so it's interesting. Nick Kokonis is asking if we would give our views on old France versus USA. And Trey, I probably have a couple of thoughts around this, and then I want you to jump in.
Yeah, I'll slow you down.
Look at good luck with that. When our family purchased Sanford, and again, we're very, very fortunate to own this piece of property, we realized that it was a special place. And I thought to myself, gosh, if I'm going to learn about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, what would my reference point be? And without question, it's Burgundy, right? And there's a lot of people who would say, hey, this is California and that's Burgundy, and you shouldn't try and make Burgundies in California. That misses the point, actually.
Completely.
Right, it totally misses the point. And I went to Burgundy in 2006. That was actually my first visit, and fell in love with the place, the people, the wines, the food. These are farmers, right? These are people who are paying very, very close attention to their vineyards. And so when I think about the comparisons between American Pinot Noir generally and Burgundy, I think about, if you own a great parcel of land, if you're fortunate to own a great parcel of land, the greatest tribute that you could pay to that place is to make wines that are representations of the place. And that's what I think the Burgundians do absolutely brilliantly. They have a parcel. They've maybe farmed it for a couple of hundred years as a family. They know what they need to do. And Trey and I don't want to speak for you, Trey, but I do know how you think a little bit. We take our cues from these families that know when they have a great parcel and the way that they interact with that parcel. So I think that the wines from Burgundy, the expressions of Pinot Noir from Burgundy, are extraordinary because of the place, and then because of the self-confidence of the family and the winemaker to not interfere. And it's because of the great place. And so I think they're maybe more nuanced. Look, I'm not a big fan of wines that are steered. Right, Trey? You and I have talked about this before.
Well, it takes a lot of confidence and a lot of experience and time not to overcompensate and feel like you need to steer something. It takes we're really lucky. And I mean, we have one of the few things that a lot of people don't have in the New World. We have a vineyard with a track record that makes age-worthy great wines. And that's not something that so many vineyards in the New World have. And that's so true. I think having that confidence and that understanding is it's easier to get out of the way and not try and steer it with too much fashion and too much ego, and make it an ode to oneself in a way.
That's right. Look at we've both tasted, Pinot Noirs that taste more like Syrah, right? Mm-hmm. And we've tasted Pinot Noirs that are so extraordinarily, elegant and nuanced. And so when I think about, Burgundy, I think, gosh, they're so nuanced, they're so subtle. How do we cause our Sanford wines to be representations of a place like that, if it's a great parcel, instead of making wines that are designed to hit a certain flavor profile? This is what Trey and I talk about: wines of place versus wines of taste. Wines of place are representations truly of a specific place. Wines of taste are wines that are designed to have a certain flavor profile. And look, if you're going to make wines that have a certain flavor profile, and I would argue that there's a lot of winemakers out there who are absolutely brilliant at doing this. If you're
they're so good. I'm horrible at it.
Yeah, I mean, we both are horrible at it, right? We want to make wines that represent a place, and that have a history and an authenticity. And look, if you're going to make wines of taste, you can buy your grapes indiscriminately, I guess, or pretty much anywhere. And the winemakers.
It'd be a terrific waste to be farming these vineyards in this really cool, wet, windy, challenging climate. It'd be much nicer to grow Pinot Noir somewhere where it was really hot and easy with really fertile soils. Sign me up.
Yeah, we talk about the Pinot Noir plant at 80 degrees it starts to shut itself down, and it starts to kind of feed on itself and uses some of its own vine as feeding. And so we this cool weather allows us to have the vines continue to ripen. But look, at Trey and I are not big fans. I could talk about my brother and my father as well in our family. We're not big fans of wines that are kind of fruit bombs and engineered or steered or directed. We're trying to make wines that tell the tale of a place. That's what makes them unique. Is that if somebody says to me, well, why are your wines, how are they different? How are they different from your neighbor's wines? And I would start with, the comment that our soil composition is different because of the landslide and because of the deposits from the Santa Ynez River. And then we highlight that place. And that's what makes them unique. And there's just this little parcel of land that's unique all by itself. So we want to highlight its authenticity and its individuality and its uniqueness and its idiosyncrasies, right?
Well, and that's the fun part. Like, I remember, California Pinot Noir was not that different of a place, even back in 2006 and 2007 was completely different. Like, the idea that you would, be using organic farming techniques or only 25% new French oak instead of 60%, and not picking at a really high Brix level, really high ripeness level, and then watering it back and adding 2 grams per liter tartaric acidity and using a super yeast that was isolated in the Rhone Valley that can ferment to 15% alcohol, and doing all these things and using the excuse like, oh, this is California, you guys are Burgundy worshipers. No, I enjoy Burgundy, but I don't worship at Burgundy's doorstep, because I think we can do our own thing here in Santa Rita Hills. And I think, we can use a lot of their techniques that they've honed over the last couple hundred years, and a lot of techniques that we figure out, and get what we think is La Rinconada and Sanford and Benedict, and not making, these wines that are kind of caricatures of what Pinot Noir is.
Yeah. So Margaret Daly just mentioned that.
Hey, Margaret.
Michael Benedict had a bold confidence to believe the land could produce a lasting Pinot Noir in a place that no one had before grown grapes. Absolutely 100% true. Look, at Michael and I, for whatever reasons, have become dear friends. I love the man. He's an extraordinary human being, and I so value the courage that he had in a place at a time where nobody else had ever grown grapes before, and Michael had enough confidence to say, you know what, I think this is the right place. And he planted grapes there, and he was right. He was 100% correct. And today, when Trey and I have tasted some of his wines from the 70s, right?
Oh gosh, yeah, the 76 and 78 and 80, the early 80s. God, what was the last 80 I had? It was like an 82 Pinot Noir. Just mind blowing.
And they're extraordinary, right? And so Trey and I are looking at each other going, this is what this place has to offer, right? Michael Benedict was doing this back in the 70s together with Richard, right? They had planted the place, and there was nothing nearby. I mean, it was just pristine. And we tasted these young wines, these 76, late 70s, and they're extraordinary. They're stunning. It was an incredible view into the soul of this vineyard. These wines from the 70s, Pinot Noirs, that still had this incredible brightness and youth and elegance. And so it's another inspiration. Michael's an inspiration for all of us who have the opportunity and the incredible good fortune to engage with Michael and to have dialogue with him and ask him questions about what he was thinking. So we had a view of what Sanford and Benedict could be by way of Michael. And I know, Trey, you spent a lot of time with him as well, so feel free to jump in. But and then I think we're going to wrap it up here in a little bit, because we've got another 2 sessions, and I don't want to give away all the good stuff in one session.
Yeah. No, obviously I cherish my time that I have with Michael and with you, and it's a really rare opportunity to be able to have that pioneer or innovator that came up with the idea of, oh, hey, let's plant Pinot Noir in the Santa Rita Hills, own rooted. And to be able to talk and taste with him and to pick his brain about everything, from landslides to the wild strawberries that grow on the property to chanterelle foraging nearby, and it's just a terrific resource, and he's just such a lovely guy to talk with. Yeah. I love it. But as far as the next one, I think we're tasting. We're going to go in closer on the concentric rings, and we're going to be tasting a couple of Pinot Noirs.
Oh, next time.
Yeah, next time. But have you had the Vista Rincon yet?
I did.
Yeah. So I think we have a picture of that to show to everybody. The view of the corner. This is our La Rinconada Chardonnay, and this corner of the vineyard always gives us a terrific saline. You can see it there, hiding in the fog. Rinconada Chardonnay for me just has terrific minerality, a real saline presence, and it's got that distinct loud Coltrane voice. Like, it's not a shy wine. It's not an introvert at all. Do you feel that way about just generally Rinconada in general?
Totally, absolutely. We want it to express itself, and look at it, it's a vineyard that wants to be out there and be out in front of people, right?
Yeah. And I love Chardonnay as much as you do, and I remember there was a time when it was like the winemaker's nightmare that they would be making California Chardonnay, because there was this idea that you could only make a sweet, oaky, buttery, new American oak Chardonnay, and I love Santa Barbara for its Chardonnay. It's they're very precise, they're very minerally, they have lots of excitement. You can drink them by themselves or pair them well with any sort of rich dish, and they've got a lot to say.
And they're bright. Beautiful. They're bright and they're crisp, right? They're precise. Here in this picture, we see this marine influence. Next in our next seminar or next webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about the marine influence and how that affects what's happening here, and maybe how it affected some of the decisions that were made early on in terms of planting this vineyard. But I love this wine. This wine is it's precise, it's nuanced, it's well put together, it's integrated in such a beautiful way. But when you put it in your mouth, you realize that it has this incredible complexity. It's very provocative. Just, it keeps coming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It has terrific persistence.
Yeah.
And that's an upstream decision. We aren't picking it really, really late. We don't want a heavy, meandering, cheesy, buttery Chardonnay. I like wines with
cheesy.
Well,
term of art. That's a term of art.
I love Chardonnays that are very straight and very focused, and that have just a hint of new oak, and we don't stir the lees too much. And I think all the trials we've done with lees stirring and picking windows and aging regimes in the cellar and cooperages that work really well with our Chardonnay to let the site show through and not so much the technique.
Absolutely. We'll talk about the stirring of the lees as well, and the trade-offs of stirring. It's called batonnage in Burgundy, which is a stirring of the barrel during élevage, during aging. And we'll talk a little bit about that in our next seminar. Trey, I wanted to thank you for the time here. Oh, here's our team. So when you think about think about it takes a village, right? Here's our fabulous Sanford family standing in front of the barn at Sanford and Benedict, which I think actually is one of the most photographed structures in all of Santa Barbara County. We're lucky. It's beautiful.
Yeah, for obvious reasons.
But this is the team. Everybody in this photograph is as connected and in love with this vineyard as Trey and I are, and Michael as well, right? And so we love what we do. I don't know if you could tell. It's infectious. So come and visit with us at Sanford whenever you can. We will we will receive you and embrace you as our family, as the Terlato family does with all of the guests that come into one of our homes. Come and drink with us. Oh, sorry, not drink. Come and taste with us. Come and enjoy. Semantics are everything. Come and enjoy our wines. Come and enjoy Trey's company. Listen to the things that he's thinking about when we're making these beautiful wines. Come and see our special place, and we will share it with you, with open hearts. Trey, thanks for the time tonight. I really love tasting with you. I enjoy tasting with you. It's always
likewise.
I always learn something when you and I are chatting and tasting together. And I look forward to our next couple of iterations. And I'm going to leave it off to you here to close us up.
Me too. Thanks, John. And to everybody at home, come and join us not next Thursday, but the Thursday after, and we'll get deeper into some block designated Pinot Noirs and give you some more secrets of the trade. So thank you to everyone for joining us from the Terlato family and the Sanford family. Have a good night. Cheers.
Cheers.